Mohammed, I know Danny Lou, and it's the first time that you're meeting her. So, and Mohammed is based in Gaza. So let me start by first of all asking Mohammed if you could introduce yourself for Danny Lou and tell her, what's happening and what's, since last week. We spoke a week ago. Where are we at this point in time?
Okay, first of all, how are you, Mr. Danilo? I hope you're doing good. And appreciate that you're with us here in this meeting. So I'm simply Muhammad, lived in Gaza. Already finished my university degree. Right now, actually, I'm evacuated from my city Az-Zahra in the north of Gaza, and right now I'm living in the south in a city called Deir al-Balah after like more than a year in this war.
And you've moved several times from your home?
Many times, yes, many times.
And Mohammed had a very beautiful home, a very, very beautiful home. And then you showed me photos of, it's just totally destroyed now.
We lost it. And we also lost our old home. It's an apartment. We also lost it like 2 weeks ago. It's in Gaza City.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so it's very, very sad, and the purpose of these calls, because Mohammed is my web designer, in fact,
okay,
for several years, and so the purpose of the calls is simply to focus on the creativity and to focus on the optimism and to kind of continue these investing in these bridges, between people like myself who are in a place of safety and people like Mohammed who are not in a place of safety. The underlying assumption is that somehow that kind of can create an anchor, like an anchor is you can only call something an anchor if it's in a strong position, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be, yourself and myself, like we can be anchors because we are grounded in safety, and we're not in times of trouble, whereas Mohammed is in times of trouble. And so just somehow kind of like reaching out and saying, we're here as well, we can see what's going on, we know what's going on, and just don't let the optimism be destroyed, because once the optimism is destroyed, then creativity can't be born out of pessimism. It tends to be born out of optimism, doesn't it? Danny, what do you think? Please introduce yourself to Mohammed.
Well,
already, but Mohammed doesn't know you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessia, and thanks, Mohammed, for sharing that. So I'm Danny Lou. I work as a leadership and creativity coach. I also write and perform. So I have a combination of those worlds, and creativity and I suppose creating from all sorts of places for me is how I make the sense and how I hope other people make the sense of things. So I suppose I want to continue on from what was said before around the how we get into pessimism and permanence, and how when we're in tough times we can lose our optimism when we feel like something is never going to change, but remembering that there's always things move, they always move, and that's while things are moving, even if we can't see them moving, there's always optimism that we can know is coming, that we can find somehow. And I think that's when, not that I've ever been in a situation like you, Mohammed, but when things are difficult, knowing that there's nothing is permanent and there's always going to be some sort of move into something else, is where the creativity can sit.
Yeah, so it lies in that movement and change, and because things, as you say, things don't remain the same, and and that's also creativity requires movement, doesn't it? Like it doesn't happen in a stagnant situation. It happens when action is taken. So in terms of like empathy, I suppose empathy is also a requirement for design thinking and for creativity. We need to empathize with something, and for that level of emotion to be there to fuel the creativity. So I know we've had several conversations about creativity in the past. It might be worth kind of remembering in essence what your take is on what is creativity and how can we be more creative. Where are you with that at this point in time?
Ooh, I'm just formulating where am I at with that at the moment. Having a voice and finding a voice. I mean, something around the creativity that I'm working on at the moment, which is around, I'm actually writing a lot of fiction at the moment, and I'm writing the fiction around people who've lost their voice in the past. So I'm actually going through some old stories, fairy tales to be specific, and looking at characters, even though they're fictional, and saying, well, we hear all about this character, but they haven't got a voice. So how do we reach through time and space to give people back their voice? That's something that I'm really interested in at the moment. And how we need to be creative in order sometimes to find the voices that we don't always hear. And I suppose the concept of empathy really comes in there, because in order to be able to tune into those voices, we need to be able to step aside.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about Mohammed's voice being amplified. Like this is a platform for that voice to be heard. And so, when you're in a conversation with Mohammed, what would you be suggesting in terms of like how the stories of those who are in Gaza can be amplified? What is it? What does it take for the voices to be heard?
I suppose it's well, sharing the voices in a space where they can be heard, or via someone else who can be heard, because sometimes it's, the amplification, I think, is really interesting and so important, because when we feel we can't speak, or we feel like it's unsafe to speak, and there's that concept of safety again, how do we pass on that story to those who can hear it? And it can be done in a myriad of ways. It might be through voice, it might be through image, it might be through something else entirely, but being able to share in a safe space that might be very contained, but for somebody else can then pass on that baton of the story as a way of amplifying. I'm very aware that the safety element of this is interesting, because it's hard to pass on a voice if we don't feel safe to pass on the voice.
Yes, and there are so many stories, like throughout, well, for decades now, actually, stories have been coming out. The whole world has become polarized with the stories, and hasn't it? The world is polarized. There are countries who it seems as though they don't want those stories to be heard, and there are countries who can hear those stories even if they're not being told, because they already empathize with those stories. And so it seems as though the world is divided at this point in time in terms of who can see what's going on and who's not willing to see what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes as well, I think through creativity and taking it away from the source, not entirely away from the source, but by removing it a little bit, maybe that removes the prejudice and the bias from some people to then be able to hear the story.
Yeah. So Mohammed, is like from where you're at, what do you notice about those in the world who empathize with you, but they're still not doing anything? They're still, nothing has changed. The world, the war hasn't stopped. People are protesting about the atrocities and the massacres and the genocide, but it's still going on, even though more than half of the world, I would say, can see that what's going on is are atrocities. And then there's the other half of the world, maybe the lesser half, maybe with more power. They're less but more powerful. What's your take on that? And how do you kind of come to terms with the world and your place in Gaza in relation to the world?
Okay, so firstly, there's two kind of people. Like there's who know that who was like wasn't know the truth, and after this genocide, after this more than 1 year, they watch the truth, they know the truth, and then they go and protest to make to try their best to make this genocide stop, to make the world know the real truth, what is happening right now, what's the real story. And there's other kind of people, they already know the truth, but they just closing their ears, their eyes, and trying also to hide the truth from the other people. So and also unfortunately they are supporting, they are not just like watching, accepting, no, they also supporting the genocide, supporting the killing. For example, yesterday or 1 day or 2 days ago, I heard one of Trump supporters. He's in his campaign for Trump. He's saying that, for example, we are teaching our kids the killing from they are like 2 years or in the grade two. So trying to support that it's okay to kill us because we are murder. It's okay to kill the Palestinian because he's kid right now, but his parents, his people teaching him how to be a murderer, how to be a terrorist, and then he will grow up and then he will kill us. So it's okay to kill him. It's no problem. It's not a genocide. There's I guess a minister, British minister. He said it's not a genocide. Killing more than 42,000 persons. It's not a genocide. It's trending more than 50%, maybe 80% of the buildings in Gaza Strip. It's not a genocide. It's something normal that this huge number of people being murdered, a devilly way, burned, as happened last time in the hospital, Al-Aqsa hospital, when the people in the tent was burned, when they targeting them with a huge rockets. So so if I can go back to the first kind of people who are know the truth, go to support us by protesting, they actually it looks like the protesting doesn't work or doesn't make a huge difference as who's controlling the countries or the world, who actually have the power, the economic power, the politic power, the uh, all kind of powers. They just not feel the protest or not be harm from the protest, so they simply didn't feel any pressure, so they are continue helping Israel, supporting Israel, then killing us and murder us more and more and more. So if there is any way to make this go to another level of protesting, of making a pressure on them, on the government, of anyone who have the power, the way to change the situation, they have to go to that level and try to find another way of just protesting. Maybe like an economic way, like boycotting them, or I don't know, but we have to find another thing, just not just protesting.
And this is where the creativity comes in. It's about looking for solutions which are not apparent, but being very creative, you know. So Danny, do you have any comments on what Mohammed's just said?
Oh, lots, I suppose. There's lots of thoughts, and it's so fascinating to me that people can be so selective about what part of something they look at. And it's, I guess my rhetorical question is, how can we get people to move their lenses on things? How do we get people to really see things from the perspective of how it is for you, Mohammed, for example, and for the, you know, I suppose part of me is thinking, you know, the whole thing around metaphor that we can use creatively to try and land a point. If people can't see it, if they're stuck in their way of thinking, you know, can we use a different way of saying it, using metaphor and being creative around how we move that lens that then helps people to understand in a different way what's actually going on.
Today is actually the it's the 40th anniversary of a genocide against the Sikhs. I don't know if you remember, Danilu. Do you remember in 1984? I don't know if you remember, Indira Gandhi was assassinated. Do you remember that? Do you remember that? Well, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 Sikh bodyguards, and the reason they assassinated her was because she was responsible for Blue Star Operation, which was an operation where they went into the Golden Temple in Amritsar, and thousands of innocent children and families were killed because they said that in that Gurdwara there were firearms, there was ammunition. So they sent the tanks in on a religious day where people would, were attending to celebrate. And so those things are done deliberately. Like the tanks were sent into Amritsar on a day of celebration, and thousands of innocent people were killed on purpose, because that is done to teach like a community a lesson. Is to teach them a lesson, like, we can do anything we like, basically, and when you kill people in their place of worship, it's not just simply killing them physically, it's killing them spiritually as well, because it's like, see, your God hasn't protected you, so even at that spiritual level, see, your body won't be found by your family to be cremated in the ritualistic way, and so therefore you don't even have the ability to go into the afterlife. We can do it at that extent. And so because Indira Gandhi had ordered that Blue Star Operation, she had ordered, like, for these thousands of innocent people to be killed. Her 2 bodyguards were Sikh, so one of them had gone to Amritsar and he'd seen what had happened there, and so he knew, because of his position, he knew that something like that was still being planned, for later on in the year. And so it was to stop in that further onslaught of innocent people that he and the other bodyguards, they assassinated her, which led to over 5,000 Sikhs, children, families being burnt alive, same as what's going on in Gaza. They were burnt alive. They were, businesses were destroyed, like children were killed in front of their families, etc. That happened. That, so that was led by the politicians. It was led by the politicians because, again, it was to teach the Sikh community a lesson. It was to teach them a lesson that if you do something like that, like assassinate the prime minister, you will live to regret that for generations, you see. So the point I'm making here is that what's going in Gaza, the horror that's going on, that is deliberate. The intention was to make Gaza a hell, because that's what they keep saying. It's like, we want to make Gaza a hell so that no one will want to live there. The Palestinians will not want to live there. So that is like part of the genocidal strategy, isn't it? And so when you're within that, how is it possible, because creativity is the only way out, in a way, so how do we stir up that creativity to be able to fight back without the weapons? How can we fight back with our optimism? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, yes. I suppose I'm going to go into that thing of what at any one time, what one thing have we got, or what handful of things have we got? And it's always looking at what have you got, at any moment in time, whatever that is, and using that as the starting point, in the story that you told around 1984, like, what did people have, what was their voices, who could they speak to, what is possible, how can that then lend itself to becoming something else. I'm also sort of thinking about civil rights movement. My brain's gone to like the whole miners situation that happened in my city when I was growing up, around that time actually, and the stuff, that the divisiveness that was going on around then, and what people did, which was, you know, used what they had, their voices, or went to the people that would listen, and then where's the thread? Who can keep passing this on? And then when it can get to a place where there can be power from that. So I suppose that's where that nugget of optimism lies in. What do you have? Even if it's next to nothing, there's always something we have, and it's how do we use that as the ember of the flame that we can ignite into something that creates a change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you see, Mohammed, you know, you still have a voice, you know, your voice is still there, and that voice can be amplified. So that is one resource that you have, you know, like all three of us, we have voices.
Yeah.
So with your voice, how can that voice be creative? And, you know, you have a voice, you have the stories. How can that combination of voice and stories and whatever, you have the relationships as well, you know, the relationships are there, because in 1984 people survived, you know, the Sikhs who were being burnt alive, you know, quite a significant number of them survived because they had neighbors who helped them, you know, like they had like Hindu or Muslim neighbors who pretended that these neighbors were Hindus and Muslims like themselves. You know, that's what happens during times like that, that it brings out the best and the worst in people. And so they survived through their relationships, you know, so the relationships are still there. And I think relationships are usually one of the most powerful resources, isn't it? You know, so that combination of relationship, stories, voice, you know, what is the possibility there like for creativity? Mohammed? Yeah, you're on mute, Mohammed. Yeah. It's on mute. Yeah, that's
Can
it.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's
Okay. So actually, if you let me, actually, I want to talk about having a voice, because I like a couple days ago I was reading in the social media some comments from the people here in Gaza, and they actually, as me also, were wondering, do really does us really have a voice? Also, does the world have an ears to hear? Because unfortunately, until now, nothing changed from the last year until now, and I'm scared this will be for another year. We are the same, actually not the same. Actually, be more worse than before. The killing is still, the massacres is still happening, and more people after more people. And right now, Jabalia, Beit Lahia, like yesterday, they just simply targeting a building, 5 floors. There were many refugees there, and more than 70 person, most of them kids and women, was killed in just one rocket, one shot. Does it really have a voice, or does the world can hear us? If the world can hear us, can they can do anything or nothing? They cannot do anything. So it means simply we don't have a voice, or our voice is nothing. It doesn't have any meaning, any need that we just talk and record that what's happening here in Gaza, and then since what we recorded videos, the bodies on the street, just sending them to the world and see what's happening here in Gaza, and there's nothing happening, not changing at all. Israel is still killing us. America is still sending bombs, and simply we are in the same situation, year and a half, and as I mentioned, it could be take another year, as they already said. Netanyahu said it could be, it will take another, maybe it will take another year and a half. So I don't think we already have a voice. We wasn't before.
Mhm.
Yes, the people hear us, the people know about the Palestinian situation, go and did some protesting, and nothing get changed, and then we back again that no one can hear us.
I am really, it really went in for me. Actually, you took the thing that Jessie said about having a voice, and then you built on it beautifully in a little moment of creativity where you said, "Do I have a voice, but does the world have ears?" And even just that phrase, Mohammed, has made me go, I can go off and repeat that phrase, you know, which is already your voice amplified. So it may feel tiny, and I'm sure that's awful. And yet there's still power in that small thing that you said that we can take and amplify. Because actually that's the way of putting that is, that's so powerful to remind everybody. We can remind people of that. We do have that privilege of being able to then say, are we listening? Are our ears working? What do we do with this? You know, so that I just, you know, there is a little bit of power there that I want you to, I suppose, recognize, that there's even that small exchange sometimes can really go somewhere.
That's right. Mohammed is very articulate, you know, it's very, very articulate. And so I'm really proud, Mohammed, you know, that you can kind of sum things up and, you know, make kind of, I don't know, make the observations that you are making. And even though you've been in like deeply kind of traumatized by what's been going on for a whole year, you're still kind of like remaining a mature being, you know. And I think that's the important thing, is like to hold on to that kind of, to keep ourselves intact, to keep our integrity intact. That's so important, isn't it? You know, it's like when we lose the optimism, when we lose that creativity, then we can lose our integrity as well. I heard a Palestinian journalist who's based in England yesterday, but I can't remember his name. He's involved with an organization called Palestine Action. He's a journalist, and he was saying that he read out something about this person who is in prison in England. She's in prison simply for they had kind of done this action to disrupt the this arms kind of, this company that was making drones to sell to Israel, drones that are killing people. So she did something she took action to disrupt that, and she's in prison. You know, there are English people in prison, you know, willing to go to prison because they say it's their kind of pride to go to prison for an important cause like this. But the woman who, her first name is Zoe, and I can't remember her surname, but he read out something written by Zoe, and she'd said, I'm always motivated by love and not hate. You know, so whatever she's doing it for love, not for hate. And I think that's always the moral compass always has to be, is what we're doing, is it motivated by love, or is it motivated by hate? Because we'll know that what we're doing is the right thing to do if it's motivated by love, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So and this journalist, he was also talking about how, you know, so many, you know, that the majority of people you know, in the Western world, it's more convenient for them not to listen, because it's, you know, I suppose whenever there's a genocide, most people will shut their ears because it's too kind of out of their depth to know what they can possibly do, even if they know that whatever is happening is terribly wrong. They can't see how they can help, and so they prefer to deny that whatever is happening is wrong, to deny that, because to deny it is, keeping their comfort, isn't it, Danny? Like, that, Danny Lou, that's the kind of psychological trick, isn't it? It's like, we will kind of imagine that, well, they, it must be justified. If like they're still kind of doing it, then there must be some justification that I don't know about. And so there's that in psychological terms, it's about, I can't remember the name for it now, but it's about the congruency between what we see and what we, like, I'm dyslexic, so I can't recall it, but do you know what I mean? It's like,
I do, and it's that requirement, and it reminds me of that
cognitive dissonance. That's what it is. I was trying to bring it out. It's called cognitive dissonance. So the cognitive dissonance is you try and kind of align two things, just because otherwise it would be like, well, what kind of world are we living in? And we don't accept that the world that we're living in is out of it's not aligned with a good moral compass, right? So go ahead, Danielu. I interrupted you.
No, it's all good. There's I suppose I'm building on your point, which is that demand of empathy as well. When we look at empathy, what empathy demands of us, well, I have to really look at what's going on for another person and put myself there. I have to find that place in me that relates to that place of where they're at, and it's deeply, deeply uncomfortable for people and terrifying. And to be terrified is, if it's a choice to not be terrified, I think a lot of people are going to choose not to be terrified. And I do understand that, and at the same time, our humanity depends on us going to the place where other people are to make that connection. And from that place of empathy, we can really, that's where the creativity is absolutely born. And that's where you use the lovely term of bridges. I think that's where we build the bridges. We build the bridges from that place. And, it's certainly, I think it's all of our responsibility, isn't it, to look at where can we help to build those bridges? What part do we all have to play in that, whatever that part is, in order to create something else. But it's deeply uncomfortable, and sometimes there's a sense of, if I look at what's going on over here, is that going to trickle into my world? And there's almost I suppose it's a selfishness that exists in human beings, but it's also a survival as to why people don't want to look at that. I'm not justifying it. I suppose I'm just trying to understand why we do that as human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so for you, this concept of the phoenix rising, from the ashes. So when there is absolute kind of devastation and destruction, for you, what does that metaphor of the phoenix rising, what does it mean for you?
For me, or for me?
Mohammed and Yazan is his cousin. Yazan hasn't joined today because he didn't realize that the times had changed. But Yazan is the one who came up with the concept of the phoenix rising, as a creativity project. So for you, what does that conjure up? The notion of the phoenix rising.
It's the newness that's born. I love the image of the phoenix rising, actually, because where there's fire and where there's an igniting of something, that's that creative thing. So what can come out of anything? And I suppose it's what's possible, and what do people want to be possible? What would be a brilliant phoenix rising out of that? It's that thing of where things feel absolutely devastating. There's a resilience and a fight in there that's about survival, that really pushes through and pushes past, actually, and creates more strength. And it's that strength that then builds. So that's the stuff that's coming up for me when we talk about the phoenix rising. Mm-hmm. It's such a strong image.
Yeah. Mohammed, that's a very powerful image for you in Gaza. And at this point in time, you know, does it still have power for you, that metaphor of the phoenix rising? It's
We lost
difficult.
the power. We lost the power, actually. There's right now, there's in the news that they are talking about maybe there will be a ceasefire or something. But actually, for me, I stopped watching the news and following this news about ceasefire. Simply because I lost the hope, and I don't think it will be very soon. It will be soon. So if this war just stopped, of course we will literally apply the phoenix rising, as we already did before, after the Nakba, after the 1948. As a Palestinian, where we live, we rise again, we grow again. So inshallah, if this war will, inshallah, when this war finish, of course we will rise again, and we will build ourselves again. We have the if I can say like that, the information or the science, the ability to rise again. But of course, we need this war firstly to stop, so that we can rise again. We need the source so that we can rise again. But the ability for this it exists in our blood, if I can say, as a Palestinian. We did this before, and inshallah we can do it again.
Yeah, you're right, because it's like if the house is still burning, it's very difficult when the house is still burning and somebody's still inside that house that is still burning. It's difficult to think about what you will do when the fire has been put out. You have to first put the fire out, right?
Exactly, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the creativity, it's about, well, how do we get this fire put out? Because it's not happening. You know, it's been more than a year and the fire is still kind of burning, you know, worse and worse all the time, rather than kind of subsiding. Because what's been happening in North Gaza recently, it's like even worse than what was happening before, even though like different countries are now directly involved in the war. So even though it seems as though like there's more and more support being demonstrated, even that is not quenching the fire. You know, it's not kind of putting the fire out, is it? It's the fire is still kind of blazing more and more harshly. So the creativity about how to put the fire out, I think that's where we're at, rather than how to rebuild, you know. So Danny, any thoughts on that? You know, what would you say about, you know, even in the local sense, it's like how do people put the fire out?
It's well, golly, it's about trying to again use. I'm keep going back to voice, right? It's about we have voice here. We do have voice here, and we can use that. We can create more of a movement here. We can definitely put pressure on from this end, you know, to help to put that fire out. I guess it's about thinking of other ways that we can do that as well. I don't have the answers right now. I'm kind of thinking metaphorically that when we're talking about the phoenix rising, the phoenix rises from the ashes, right? But first of all, we've got to create the ashes, and that's the putting the fire out creates the ashes. So it's the metaphor is stronger for me rather than the how at the minute. Although there's an urgency to it that I feel maybe isn't being felt as much as it could be felt. So maybe there's some creativity there. How do we get other people to feel the urgency of this? You know, yeah, I think sometimes I'm speaking generically, but I think sometimes we can numb because we see things on the news again and again and again and again. I minimize how much I watch it, but because it just frustrates me and makes me angry. But, you know, we when we see things again and again and again, it's like we become numb to it. And then the urgency can just move out. And it's actually, no, the urgency is growing and growing and growing. So the creativity is how do we really get that urgency heard? That's where I'm going initially with that anyway.
Yeah, and that was another reason for these calls, wasn't it, Mohammed? Because it's like, rather than thinking about statistics, it's like individual people. You know, it's like we're talking about real people here, and every real person has real feelings, they have real lives. It's, you know, it's like, it's the antidote to dehumanization, because it's through that dehumanization that's how things are justified, you know, because the justification relies on dehumanizing a certain group of people. You know, that it's like, well, they were all terrorists, so what do you expect? You know, like same as with the Sikhs, you know, like I said, 5,000 children and you know, families, they were killed. It's like, well, you know, that what did they expect? They killed Indira Gandhi. It's like, did they? You know, two bodyguards killed Indira Gandhi. Two bodyguards killed her. You know, not these 5,000 people. So it's that thing about, you know, you punish people collectively because you've dehumanized them and said, well, you know, they could have done the same thing. You know, these children could have grown up and done the same thing. So we had to, you know, we had to defend ourselves. That's always the thing, isn't it? So you dehumanize and you make it right by saying it was either them or us.
Yeah, and there's something that's so powerful, because when we hear an individual's story, we hear any one individual story, we can get that humanity back, that dehumanization that you talk about. We can reverse that by hearing individual stories. There's something about that makes us reawaken to the fact that these are human beings here whose lives have been obliterated. So I suppose, again, the creativity and the how do we start to, you know, move this is how many individual stories can we amplify, rather than the general narrative, like, as you say, which can get moved around and mispositioned all the time. It's how can we get these as many individual stories out so that people remember the humans here.
And it's also about remembering the human beings so that narrative, that political propaganda narrative, is disrupted. Yeah. You know, so it's like, oh, you know, so this is the narrative. It's like that, you know, these were kind of would-be terrorists. Is that really true? You know, because here is like a real person, and these are real people. And it's like, how can you kind of align what that narrative is with the reality of the facts that are being kind of presented in, you know, hard evidence, I suppose.
Yeah. And disruption, of course, is such a key part of creativity. That
disruption, that's right. You know, so for me, it's like, again, these you know, academics are warned not to engage in controversial topics, and that's why, you know, sometimes on these calls, on some occasions, we've had some academics, but they don't usually come back because they don't want to engage in anything that could be misconstrued. And me, therefore, even having a conversation is an act of dissent. You know, a conversation is an act of dissent. It's like saying, I'm still going to do it anyway. You know, that's the Sikh way. It's like we don't hide. You know, we don't kind of like say behind closed doors, oh, I support you, but I won't say that in public.
Yeah.
You know, but I have a lot of friends who will say, yeah, I support the Palestinian cause, but I can't say that in public. I can't come on to a public call, which will be on YouTube, and say what I really think. And that includes Palestinians in England, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because even though we're talking about humans here, humans and human life, and the value of human life, we still have fear around. Even if I'm speaking up for humans and human life, that's gonna get labeled as me having a political position, which may or may not be true, but actually in some senses is irrelevant, because actually what we're talking about here is saving human lives and being humane and stopping this horrible situation completely, this genocide that's happening. And it is back to I love that what you said around the disrupting of that political narrative, and actually giving back the human story and giving back the voice to these people. It's that to me is where the real seeds of the I suppose the ashes from which the phoenix may rise, and hopefully sooner rather than later, that's where that can happen.
Yeah, and even if it's not for the whole kind of, the whole community, for one person, so for Mohammed,
Yeah,
it's like, it's just for one even if it's just for one person, it's to say, right, I have the ears. Mohammed, earlier on you were saying, well, do we really have a voice, because people don't seem to hear? As long as you know that there is at least one person who is like unrelated to you, in a different country to you, as long as like you can trust that the people who come on this call, they really do have the ears to hear you, that, even if it's just a handful of people, that in itself is like something, rather than nothing, right?
Yeah, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, but if I can mention about people who can like support Palestine, but he cannot actually support us or support Palestine, or talking about Palestine and about Gaza in public, because they afraid, because what they will they reflect on them, the result on them. I think about this before. I don't know if I blame them or not. Like, for example, we lost everything here in Gaza, so it's like you should do something in public. But in the same time, I think like if he do this and support us in public, but in the end he's just one person or very few people, so they will not do anything. They will not do any change, and in the end they will be really punished hardly. Maybe they will lose everything. So I don't know if I can blame them, but I can blame in generally, because we cannot just like let a very small group of people to support us. Like if the whole community or the huge number of people support us in public, they will cannot like punish all these huge number of people. So I can't talk about the small number, but I can say about the whole community or the in generally about them. So if the community, the big community, did something in public for Palestine, or say and support Palestine in public, this will make actually a difference. This will protect them as a group of people, a huge group of people who support Palestine.
yeah,
I do remember like when there was the South Africa, the apartheid movement, there wasn't a ban on people talking against apartheid at that time. There wasn't a ban. People didn't feel like, oh, their jobs would be at risk if they said they didn't agree with apartheid. But things have changed a lot over the decades, haven't they? Like the world has become more and more kind of polarized into what is right and what is wrong, and the notions of like what is good, what is bad, with these narratives, with the social media and everything, it's become a lot more complex, hasn't it?
yeah. I think with the polarization as well, there's I'm remembering an art exhibition I saw a few years ago at the Biennale in Venice, which was talking about, be very careful around polarization, because closely on the tail of that is censorship. and that I feel we self-censor so much more now because of all of this, and that is dangerous, because the consequences of speaking up have become bigger. And that's, I know that's a slight tangent in one respect, but it relates, I think, to why people are so frightened to speak up as much as they might have done, like you say, in the past. It's an interesting contrast. I'm trying to find the right words myself now, but it's an interesting juxtaposition to put the South Africa, because I hadn't thought of that. But you're right, there wasn't as much fear around speaking up then. Where it was actually encouraged, especially here in the UK, to support and to lend our voices to something like that. Whereas, yeah, it feels much more fragile, scary, volatile, even to do that.
And what Mohammed said earlier about, like people having to face negative consequences, because there have been several actors and actresses that have spoken out and their careers have been damaged as a result of speaking out. And so their careers have been damaged, but nothing good has happened as a result of it for Gaza in any case. So it's like, well, what was the point of wrecking their career when it's not going to change anything anyway?
Mm.
There's that as well, isn't there? So you have to be, there has to be that wisdom of like when to take action, what to say, when to say it, and being articulate.
Yeah, definitely, and how to say it as well, so that it can be heard in the most effective way. And back to your example of Zoe, with her, my intention is love. It's
I'm always called by love, she said. Yeah, she said, I'm always called by love and not by hate.
Yeah, and that's almost the compass for us all to follow with this. And of course, again, from that place, it's more of an open place where things can happen, and things that we might not expect can happen, and they can be good things, hopefully. But when we're working from a place of hate or fear, then it's hard for things to catch in that way. So it's a very delicate tightrope that everybody is walking, I think, even over here around it all. But we should definitely keep going and trying to find the threads of how we can amplify and lend our voices to this.
Yeah, because I feel like, when people go out on protests, I mean, that's great, because in numbers, like numbers are very powerful as well. You see thousands and thousands of people, and that has some, like a ripple effect. It has an impact. But when in 2001, was it, just before the invasion of Iraq, there were in fact 2 million people that protested in London. 2 million people came out. That was a huge number, and I don't think there's been a protest as that big. But did it have an impact? No, it didn't.
No.
It didn't have an impact. No.
Which is so frustrating, isn't it? And of course, we've since had all of these conversations around protest laws and things that are coming in around that now, which is a form of control and censorship, and that's dividing of numbers down. But there is always, if we can write or we can speak, there's always a way of making sure that people's stories are heard. And in the retelling of a story, that doesn't have to be political even, but you're retelling a story, you're sharing a story.
And when we empathize with another human being, through that empathy, we are connected through that empathy, and therefore there isn't that kind of division of like, well, who's in Gaza, who's in a safe place, because in a way that connection between us makes that problem, although we're not experiencing the adverse impact of what you're suffering, Mohammed, we're still feeling it. So in that feeling it, we're part of that as well. And so so the issue, it's not simply in Gaza, it's all over the world. There are people all over the world who are feeling what the trauma of what's going on there, even though they're not physically experiencing it, but they are emotionally and spiritually experiencing it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know, in the same way that you kind of like feel, well, do we really have a voice? There are people like yourself all over the world who are doubting their own voice as well, thinking, I mean, even people like myself, you know, I'm kind of like saying, well, do I really have the words and the communication skills to say what I want to say? Well, not really, you know. All my expertise is simply in building the bridges. I don't have the communication skills, but I do know how to use the skills that I do have, which is about building bridges and creating platforms, you know. So we have to use the resources that we have in a way that we're good at, you know. So I'm good at creating platforms, but I'm not good at being articulate and, you know, using words like I'm called by love, you know, and that expression that you used, Mohammed, earlier on to say, well, we have the voice, but do people have the ears to listen? You know, that's a creativity, a different kind of creativity, isn't it?
Absolutely. I would echo that. By the way, I think you're incredibly articulate, but I would echo. I also feel like, do I know enough? Who, you know, how can I don't understand enough about this? I know a bit, and you know, and all of that, but at the same time, I can show up and I can listen and I can definitely lend my voice, you know, and I could do that by standing on a stage and telling a story. I could write that story down, you know. These are my creative outlets, and actually that's quite powerful, even to read someone else's story on a stage where people are listening. It is so powerful and can change, you know, can sometimes change one or two people's decisions to do something, and who knows where that can then go. So I suppose that that thing of hope is, it's easy to feel hopeless when it feels hard and it feels like there's resistance, but that even if there's one little bit of possibility, we have to hold on to that hope that it can change, that something can change, and we might not know how or where, but if we keep using what we've got, then there's more possibility for that phoenix to rise.
And in building a community around, you know, Gaza, like an international community, that community, for something to be called a community, there has to be that commitment, there has to be that familiarity. You know, like we can't say we're part of a community if we don't show up regularly. Like for example, Mohammed, Chris, he sent apologies. He can't be here today. He will be here next week. But do you feel like a sense of community with Chris because he's committed? He shows up week after week, doesn't he?
Yes, exactly. Actually, I used to meet him every week in this meeting, and I expected also to meet him today, but surprised he's not here with us today.
Yeah, he'll be here next week, and he has a grandson about the same age as yourself, you know. So sometimes I think, you know, maybe you remind him of his grandson, you know, his and that kind of evokes the empathy. It's like, what if Mohammed was my grandson, you know? Yeah, next time he comes on, you can ask him about his grandson.
Inshallah.
Okay, so Danny, please do stay connected with Mohammed. He's on LinkedIn. Yeah, he's on LinkedIn, and
your name so that I can connect with you.
Yeah, and amplify his story. You know, take his story to your world.
I would absolutely be honored to. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me this evening.
All right, wonderful. Okay, Mohammed, I'll see you next week, and Danny Lou, I'll see you when you can make it again.
Yes, absolutely. I'll let you know.
Okay, all right then. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Take good care. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you next time. Have a safe week, Mohammed.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Inshallah. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.